Okay, I'd like to call to order the Lenox Public Schools School Committee meeting of October 11th, 2022. And the first order of business is hearing any public comment. None. No correspondence. We'll move on to committee meeting minutes of September 12th.
Mr. Chairman, unless anybody needs a minute to review, I move to approve the minutes of September 12th, 2022.
I will second the motion.
Any comments, edits? Hearing none. Actually, because Megan is not with us, we need to do this a roll call vote. David?
David Rimler, aye. Veronica Pettin, aye.
Bob Wine,
Christine Morrow, aye.
Bob Lunch, aye. Warren Cass, aye.
Megan Kirby, aye.
okay, thank you. And school committee meeting minutes, the retreat minutes of September 28th, 2022.
I'm just staying informed and moving things along. I move to approve the minutes of September 28th, 2022.
I will second that motion as well.
Any further comments? Hearing none, roll call vote.
David Rimler, aye. Veronica Pettin, aye.
Bob Wine,
Christine Morrow, aye.
Bob Lunch, aye. Warren Cass, aye.
Megan?
She said, she raised her hand.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
All right, so start with highlights and recognitions. I think the thing that I would like to really highlight and recognize is that school has finally, at least from my vantage point, begun to look and feel more like, for lack of a term, a normal school, maybe pre-pandemic schooling in a sense. When you spend time in schools today, you see a lot more of students getting together and working in partners and in pairs and in teams. We're not seeing the spacing and distancing that we saw and instructional implications of that that we saw during COVID. So I think our students have done a great job in terms of bouncing back and demonstrating resiliency. Our teachers are doing a great job creating high quality and engaging activities for students and lessons where we're seeing students engaged in hands-on work and group work and discussion. And so it's great to see a school over the high school and it more as it looks and feels more like school. Also want to recognize our administrative staff. It's National Principals Month. So just a thank you to Brenda, to David, and to Tim Lee for all the work that they do to help keep our schools running well. And we appreciate their efforts and energies to open in the opening of the school year and beyond. We have a couple of other items on the superintendent's report tonight. The first one, a couple of field trips really. The first one is a proposal to attend a Washington DC field trip. And I don't know if there's anyone to speak.
Hi, good to see you all. I'm Sue Espizer. Taking up with Dr. Gosling's point about returning to pre-COVID school practices. You might remember me from years before COVID when we went to Washington DC. So I'm back and asked your permission to take the junior class to Washington DC for 3 nights in March. We'll go by coach, stay in a hotel just outside the city. And we go to, the itinerary is not set. The one I gave you is what we were going to do in 2020, but that had kind of a last second axe to it. So we go to basically as many of the Smithsonian as we can, the National Portrait Gallery, the new African American History Smithsonian is one we're still hoping to get to for our first time. And it's a great trip because it fits in with the American Studies curriculum that the juniors are doing. It also, of course, you know, whatever this word is, spills over into, yeah, thank you, into the other discipline areas. And also, I mean, in the years now, when we're talking about social and emotional learning, it has just, I think, kind of boundless effects on the student body to spend that time together. And I think in the past, we've managed to get around 90% of the class with us. I've been polling kids so far and trying to get interest, and right now I have, I think 42 of 68 kids who want to come, and who are saying they're gonna come. So I think with a little shaking of the tree, I can get that number up a little higher. So since it's out of state, we need your permission.
May I ask a question?
Mhm.
So I'm a little out of the loop in that I'm not up to date on information about what was happening. At some point, I believe it was 8th or 9th grade, we're doing the trip to DC. Is this in replacement of that? Is this it's a totally separate thing?
Yeah,
Your
I
American Studies.
haven't.
Okay,
I don't
you're
feel
like,
like it's happened
this is
since I've
your
been here.
group.
So in 2017, we went, and that year, we took the sophomores, I think, because I put the trip together, and that was the year I moved from teaching 9th grade to 11th grade. And then we went again in 2019 with who was then the 11th grade, and then we were supposed to go in 2020. And we had to cancel that at the beginning of March.
Yeah.
Of that year, so now we're back. Hopefully.
So then my other question is, am I just missing it too? I read it quickly before I came. Cost per student.
Cost per student, right, on what I gave you says 600 per student, but I have found a different hotel, and I think it will be actually a little bit less than 550 per student.
Great. And we do have the ability to, for students
Mhm.
to apply if they need help.
Yeah, for not financially.
Okay. I saw I went to the African American History Museum, literally, I think, a few weeks before everything closed down.
Really?
And it was really, really fabulous.
Well,
You
the
haven't-
first
I mean,
year-
It's really wonderful.
I think
Excited for you to go. The student conference.
the first year that we went, sorry to interrupt you, I think it had just opened, but because we were a group and they were so busy, we couldn't get in. And then the second year, it was the same. And so finally in 2020, we got in and we had a tour booked, and then here we go.
So what we need is get a motion on the floor.
Oh, sorry. I move to approve the field trip request to Washington DC as submitted by Ms. West.
Seconded.
Additional discussion, questions?
I want a chaperone. I can't.
Yeah,
I'd love
Seems
to.
like you've got quite a few shots.
You have a good group, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor, again, roll call vote,
David Rimler, aye. Veronica Penton, aye.
Bob Vaughn, aye,
Christine Mark, aye.
How much I, Warren Cass, I.
and Megan was gonna raise her hand. And I gotta look and see if I can see her. Okay, good. Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so have a fun evening. We have another field trip request, another exotic hotel, so, Ms. Lee's here to, talk to us about a trip they're planning for French immersion in Quebec City.
That's right. So I'm hoping to bring a group of students to Quebec City in April. And I've given you an itinerary, so hopefully you can see exactly what we're planning. This is a group that has planned trips for us before, so we're confident with this group. It's all immersion, so every tour they give is in French. I'm really confident in what they plan for us, and because we've done it in the past, we've gone with them both to Montreal and Quebec. This one, I just wanted to stick in Quebec just for the language. Not that Montreal is fantastic, it really is, but I just wanted to get more bang for the buck, really. I have a group of 15 or 16 who say they're interested. It's different when it comes to paying, of course, but I know there's a group that's excited to go, both juniors and seniors. So that's kind of where we are.
So how many did you say you had?
Well, right now I have 18 potential, but that's. I don't want to oversell because every email I sent out, I said, first of all, that I have to ask permission to go. So they know it's not quite real yet. It's real when I say, all right, now I need a down payment of such. Money. And then that's real.
Okay, once again, we're gonna get a motion on the table.
I move to approve the field trip to Quebec as presented by Madame Dupuis.
Okay,
Seconded.
Okay, any additional discussion, questions? for Mr. Queen?
I think the attached agenda is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Great. Okay. We'll call for a vote. David Rimler, aye.
Veronica Benton, aye.
Todd Vaughn, aye.
Christine Morrow, aye.
Alderman I, Warren Cass, I.
Do we have Megan?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, well,
Good night.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move on to the final two bullet reports, points in my report. I also just want to circle back on the highlights and recognitions. I want to also just acknowledge and offer our, heartfelt public praise for the work of folks who've been working behind the scenes to help implement PowerSchool, bring that on board. One of the significant hurdles that was I think ticked off of our list just over the weekend was getting transcripts ready for our seniors. And that's no small feat. We're bringing data out of one system into another one. Sometimes that data is good, sometimes that data needs to be cleaned up and repackaged and reformatted. We had to build a custom template. We have to test these things, make sure they work. And then maybe double, triple, or triple check everything, make sure that's accurate. And so folks have put in a lot of hours around this project. And so I just want to publicly thank our guidance department, Tara Romeo, Pam Murray, our data manager, Elizabeth Nicole, and our team over in technology, Lily Pereira and Randy McLeod for all their work and getting this over the finish line. There was times where it felt like it wasn't gonna get there, but through the hard work and folks going above and beyond, and coming together as a team, they got this done. So it's something that's certainly in our kids' best interest as they look at early applications to college. We're really fortunate that we have people who are so dedicated to their work and can do such good work. And so big thanks to everybody. Moving on my report, I'd just like to share with the community. We did send out a message today, but one of the recommendations from the bullying report was to try to offer more online resources for folks. And so I built an anti-bullying webpage. So if you go to the main Lenox public school website, you'll see an anti-bullying tab along the top. If you click that, that will link out to the site that I built, where you'll find streamlined reporting forms for both Morris and for LMHS. It allows you to quickly and easily fill out a bullying report electronically. And that's a report that can be filled out by students, by parents, by teachers, from anywhere, anytime. So we're trying to make the barrier to those reports easier for folks. There's also a host of other resources for folks, including our own district policy, state laws. The bullying report itself is also linked there, so you have access to that. We also have links where parents can go to learn more. But again, we just wanted to let folks know that that page is now live, and that's probably the best place to go for all things bullying related in the district, and the number one place we really want people to go to make complaints or tell us about incidents of unwanted behavior. Whether you think it's bullying or not, that helps us track these things. Now, I think that was one of the weaknesses in the past, was that we didn't have a system where these things were housed electronically, and this now does that for us. And so now I'm able to see what's been submitted. Our principals are also able to see what's been submitted, and we can see the steps that are being implemented as they move through their investigative processes.
Thank you.
And then related to that, we're also looking forward to offering a series of community forums at each school. So we'll do one for upper and lower elementary families at Morris, and we'll do a middle school and high school one at LMHS. And that's an opportunity for families, students to come together and talk about what's going well in schools, where are the areas for growth, get more information around bullying resources, and where else is on people's hearts and minds. But we want to be able to have that community conversation And break it down so that the unique needs of each of those, pockets of folks are met and given, attention and some time and some conversation. So we're working out with the principals what, will be the best schedule for their schools, but we'll share that this week, we're going to host those forums for folks. And we're really excited about that. I think it's going to be, a great time to come together and have that conversation. We did one last year for middle school parents at MMHS, and I thought it went really well. And I thought productive, we learned a lot, we were able to answer questions, and so I'm a big fan of that type of approach to hosting folks. And that concludes my report.
Any members have any comments on anything?
Oh, it's good, Mark. It's a good looking thing.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting the word out on that.
Thanks.
Okay, MSC policy review update. I just put this on. Christina's really kind of the point person on this, but I put this on. We mentioned it at our retreat the other night. So we now had an opportunity to begin the process in the governance and leadership. And governance and leadership is, relatively the sections of the policy manual that they've worked on so far include a couple that kind of fit into the governance and leadership section, and they're relatively speaking smaller than some of the sections that would be like overwhelming. The book is this, the governance and leadership section might be this part of it. And the process is Liz LaFawn will meet with us and talk about every aspect of what the MSC folks have done, looking at each policy. It's kind of daunting, and we're going to need to schedule a lot of days once we get more of the reports that will go to the other subcommittees. There's going to need to be some time scheduled with Liz to make it all work. So far, we got through 10 or 12 subsections or whatever.
In an hour.
Yeah.
It was eye-opening to me how closely MASC is working with us, and she says that is their normal practices, that so when your subcommittees come up and have a policy statement ready, she will attend, which can be virtual, but she will attend and walk through the entire document, which could be many pages with you, and walk through all the proposed changes and get your input.
And she'll do it in person if that seems to be, a better strategy, a better way. Because I looked at it and I said, how many years is it going to take us to go through this? And
I think
she
she
said-
suggested of one per month for one segment.
Yeah, but she said that it's surprising how quickly you can get through even mammoth pages of documents. Because, we're, in the sense, we're trusting MASC to give us the most up-to-date language on all these policies. So theoretically, our wordsmithing might be less than it would be if we were just creating a policy ourselves. But again, when you go to actually review them, who knows? So
Yes, they're long documents, but the changes, which are all meant to bring us up to the standard of Mass General Law currently, as well as best practices according to MASC's purview across the state. The changes, the fraction of what is actually changing is very small. So that we're not, at least what we've seen so far, not talking about major changes. It's sort of like use a different term here. This is the preferred term over what you used however many years ago when this was last approved. So it's I wouldn't say in that sense, it's yes, there's not a lot of wordsmithing, but it's important, I think, to go through it with a detailed eye, which we are doing. And then another suggestion she made is that it's helpful to look at this as the real hard work and the bulk of the work is being done by the subcommittee itself. And so the rest of the committee, I'm rest assured that the subcommittee has fully gone through, has asked all the questions, has worked with Liz, and has endorsed the changes that will then come forward to the full committee for review. So essentially, hopefully this, this will work in practice, but the subcommittee does the work up front so that the full committee is not then burdened by needing to read word for word through 80 pages every meeting.
What format are these changes coming in? Is it a red line of the existing?
Essentially, yes, it's a word document, yes. And she calls out the changes.
And she'll send a list of the policies at the beginning, just like in our policy manuals, a list of all the ones that under A or B or whatever. And she'll indicate, just there, if there's, she'll put an asterisk if there's this type of change, that type of change. But then as you scroll down and actually look at the policies, and sometimes they'll have our policy and then they'll have exactly the same code and they'll have their policy. And so you can look and see what the differences are. And yeah, but it's a
No other.
big task.
It's a big task. No, so governance and leadership is going first, and we will be on the hook for the first 3 segments at least, which means I don't think any other subcommittees will be impacted for a few months.
Right.
So just know that it is in the future, but in 2023.
Can I interject a couple of things, just because, not everybody listens to every meeting, but I know people are tuning in. So MASC is Mass Association of School Committees. That is our sort of professional organization that we are part of, that helps to guide us and offers us consultants, and they do trainings, they offer trainings for us and how to do our jobs most effectively. So for people who don't know that, Liz LaFond is a woman, works for MASC and provides support to us, including individually if we have questions we want to call. And then relative to the policy, I think my first year here, we did a less thorough, but kind of went through and did a run through of the policy manual. So that, it's not like it's terrible, and then we do different edits along the way with proposed policies. So I really think that, although tedious, and thank you, and each of us will be taking on our part of the work. I know TLC, the teaching, learning and culture subcommittee will get a chunk of things as well. I think it's really important to be sure that we are following policies that are both recommended, some that are legally required, and some of that legislation has changed. So we want to have the most updated version. And so this is the not fun work, but important. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to kind of say to the community, because some people might not be aware, we have an upcoming training of Mass Association of School Committees that is done jointly with Mass Association of Superintendents. That's done every year in November, and I attended last year, I'll be attending this year. We get a chance to really dig in to some important understanding about education leadership, how to run a good school, how to all kinds of things. So I appreciate the work and the support that MASC provides to us.
Thank you, it's great contact.
Christina, we started doing some of that work a couple of years ago. We were concerned about the mass general law citations at the bottom of the policies. Is MASC like double check those?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
part of it.
they had just some of the sections we looked at, they had additional references at the bottom that were. Yeah.
And then the other thing was, we'd always wished there was some sort of revision date or something on the policy pages themselves, because we couldn't tell what they'd been looked at last. In any way, shape, or form. It was like you look at a page and did you look at it last year or did you look at it 10 years ago?
In theory, we would have 2022 and 2023 dates on all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
When we get done.
When we finish.
But I think that's important to make sure that we end up getting that on. Because
Because I think it confusing.
Christine and I talked about that, and the dates don't come from the name, smell out for its final document.
okay,
It should be probably the date that you approve it in school committee. MASC won't necessarily know that.
That'll be helpful.
okay, and also at our retreat, we talked about distributed leadership. We're going to bring some suggestions to the table. So, or no,
I have that.
okay, I was gonna say, has everyone got a copy of this?
Yeah, I figured it would be that it would be circulated for your vote. Pass that.
Really true.
There you go. Like we discussed at the retreat, this was just an attempt to summarize the discussion of roles various members of the committee can play in supporting the administration. I just grabbed, as our attorney had sort of cited the advisory on school governance memo from Desi. I grabbed sort of the relevant comments there on the relationship between superintendent and school committee, and then just outline the basic buckets of stuff that is liable to come up and which committee's jurisdiction would roughly fall under. Ronnie took a look at it also. I don't know if you have any other comments on it. But I think the intention was not for this to be a formal policy of some sort that we need to vote on, but just for it to be a way of us all being on the same page in terms of what we think fits where. So if people are seeing anything as they glance at it now, please raise it. Otherwise, it's fine to reflect upon it and discuss it at any time in the future.
And I'll only comment to say that I think that the ability for us to both the essential nature of us complying with open meeting law and also with education reform, ensuring that we give our leaders, beginning with Dr. Costa, the ability to do their job in a way that is what it's hired to do, but also a spirit of collaboration that we have been in, I think, for most of the time, but at times we've had a lot going on in the last couple of years. And so being able to bring in another person who is focusing on that particular subject matter, I think is helpful. And we, have had other situations where, where our chair has certain responsibilities, but when we support that, I think it helps all of us to do our jobs a little bit better, a little bit more smoothly, getting other perspectives. I think it's really important. So again, recognizing that within this document, it says that the ultimate responsibility for a lot of these items is with the superintendent, but he has been very open and collaborative with us and wanting to have that level of leadership, that style of leadership. It's really good and benefits the district.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's
Mark,
good.
I kind of leave it to you to, if there's anything on here that you feel like is not gonna work, you let us know. Maybe try it out for a little bit here and see how it goes.
Yeah, I just have one question on it's just the should versus the could consult. I just feel it just may run up against one of our governance policies. I forget which BD, it's one of the governance policies that talks about who the superintendent, when the superintendent should consult. And the superintendent should consult, I believe it says the chairman when felt necessary. So I just want to be careful, and this is not going to be a policy, so it's not going to interfere. But I think there may be instances where some flexibility should be involved. Because our last personnel issue, one could say, should have been the HR person, should it have been governance, should it have been the community outreach. So I think it is a little bit, gives the superintendent a little bit of flexibility to respond to the circumstances as they arise. Although I'm not advising changing anything, I just want to point that out.
Thank you. Is there additional change or something?
Just.
I'm taking issue with the formatting and capitalization of various. We'll submit those for the record.
Okay, thank you. So we're on to subcommittees, governance and leadership met last week.
Yes, that's what we, but we spent the whole hour on already.
Right.
Yeah, it's part.
Yeah. and finance met, right after that. And, the major thing we talked about was the budget going forward, but also could we create a kind of a 5-year looking forward, with things we'd like to do, and how might we include those in future budgets by kind of preparing the way and look and having a broader look forward. And we're gonna be meeting in a couple of days, and governance is meeting. Is it Thursday meeting?
The 20th.
Next Thursday.
Oh,
Next
a
Thursday,
week
yeah.
from now, yeah. Human resources?
Human resources met last week. Discussed a few things primarily focused on organization structure within the administration. I think the first thing, probably the most near-term relevant, is the question of the current structure of a principal and assistant principal across LMNHS versus shifting to a model that would have principals for the high school and middle school. And Mark, I don't know if you want to say a little more about that. I think that in general, the subcommittee feels like it's a very good idea, but it's something that would affect how a job is posted to fill a current vacancy. And it will potentially have budget implications insofar as 2 principals are likely to cost at least a little bit more than a principal and assistant principal.
Right, so right now we currently have a principal and an assistant principal, and they operate in kind of a outdated, by school leadership kind of standards model where the principal handles certain aspects of the school, and then largely the assistant principal handles just discipline. Professional organizations have been trying to push against this for decades because while the 2 jobs sound similar in title, the assistant principal does not get the preparation that would lead them to naturally be ready to become a principal themselves, right? So if all you're doing is on the discipline, you're not dealing with all the other things that the principal might deal with in terms of instructional leadership, budget and finance, scheduling, staff supervision and evaluation. And so even if schools that have folks with those 2 titles, it's long been advocated that they should think about kind of viewing it more as a co-principalship and a partnership. And so that's one of the things that, as I think about that, I think about the current structure at LMNHS. It seems that it may make more sense for us, given that middle school has been kind of a challenging area for us. Pre-COVID, but I think certainly post-COVID, where students are essentially taken from an elementary school and kind of brought almost to a high school environment. And our middle school staff does a great job, to try to do their best to work with those kids and get them ready. But I think that the overall school and district would benefit by having more targeted attention to the unique needs of middle schoolers versus the unique needs of students at the high school level. And so the concept would be that we would have 2 principals responsible for their own divisions, so to speak, in terms of instructional leadership, staff supervision, evaluation, curriculum, budget, scheduling. They would work together so that we still have a cohesive overall school, right? And so we want to have 2 schools that have some distinction, but then also are still one school overall. And so there are many districts around the state that have that model for that they have middle high school. And so it might be also worth a while maybe to go and visit a few folks, around the state to get an idea of, how they are dividing that up and learn from them. They're do this very well. So overall, I just think that moving forward, if we could create some, financial space for that to happen, I think our students would definitely benefit, particularly the middle schoolers, but it would also be an additional benefit for the high schoolers as well, where you get a little bit more focus and a little bit more of a distinctive experience at each of those levels.
Do you have any kind of time frame in mind?
I mean, yeah, if I had a magic wand and an open checkbook, I mean, it would be as early as next year. But I would suggest right now that we are looking at building the budget that Melissa and I are likely to have that as probably one of our high level asks. In terms of it, so what it really means in the day in dollars and cents is adding some extra money to the line right now that's reserved for the assistant principal. And so Melissa and I will have to kind of look at that and see what that would look like in terms of the budget, but I think, you know, that would feel very confident going into the town meeting. The very clear ask of being able to demonstrate, you know, what the benefit is for students, and what you're essentially buying by adopting that budget.
So just a reminder that this position would have to get created by the school committee, you know, before. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are 3 steps here because there's the actual hiring of the position, and my guess is that for purposes of posting the position, there's not that much difference in how we would describe the principalship one way or the other. But as we're going through the hiring process, it would be good to know exactly what we're hiring for. There's the budgeting and there's the formal change to the position descriptions, and so I think our intention was, you know, initially to just raise it for everyone's attention if people had initial questions or reactions, and then to bring back probably after our next meeting, sort of proposed job descriptions for the committee to consider. But you know, I really like the idea. I think particularly because it speaks from both sides to something I think we found ourselves struggling with in terms of school culture. On the one hand, the problem of the middle school really needing its own attention and definition. And on the other hand, recognizing that discipline and addressing challenges within the school community is a core function of leadership that we don't want to have sort of delegated off to the side. And so I think this is a step in the right direction on both of those fronts. And I think would probably also just deepen the level of talent we're likely to have in our administration over time. That just gives us more flexibility when whatever comes up in life that needs you short an administrator for some reason.
I think it'd be nice, I think we give Brenda someone that she could work closely with too, to really, you know, map out how can we really dovetail, that transition to make it as seamless as possible for kids. You know, and working again to make sure the curriculum is aligned from one school to the next, programs are aligned, supports are aligned. And I think that would allow us to do that in a much more coherent fashion than we currently are.
I just want to add, I think, you know, coming back to my kids went into middle school, the issue of sort of how do we address the particular needs of middle school age kids in lots of different ways, right? Culturally, or development needs. You know, when you see the 6th graders going into that building at the same time that the high schoolers are coming out, you know, you can see it, you think, how are we doing this? And I know that we've tried a number of different ways to sort of keep the model and kind of make it work. And I think we've come up short in a number of different ways. And I think some of which are very evident in recent conversations that we've been having, but in other ways. And I think this leadership style, from the way you described it and what I can tell and want to hear more about, engenders an ability to create that culture, the middle school culture, the what is it happening when a child is developmentally going through middle school, which is very, very different than when they're going through their high school years and they're getting in and there's transitions in each one, right? There's that big transition in 6th grade, there's a big transition in 9th grade, and then, you know, we see those juniors and seniors. So I think it gives us the ability to also work with students in unique ways, and professionals in education sometimes really, there are those that go, not middle schoolers, and there's a lot of those that this is exactly the age that they really feel that's their skill set and that's what they want. And I think that goes to Oren's sense too about being able to robustly hire for people who really, you know, that's what they do and what they know they do a great job at. And then we have different goals that happen in high school. So I think I'm looking forward to the continued conversation. Obviously, We'll vote on it when the time is to vote on it. We have all of the information we need, but I want to move forward with that planful process. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, just to say, you know, as I think you know, I've been a big advocate of this for this type of change in structure for a long time. When we're creating the superintendency, I've brought it up numerous times. It's great to see that it was able to finally have some nuts and bolts applied to it and really taking a real strong look at it to see whether it would feasibly work and really potentially bring it to the table as a reality. So it's great. It's great.
Just for all clarity sake, that would mean that we would do away with, you know, the assistant principal position, and we would have two principals. What I'm saying, we're gonna still have the assistant principal and then add another principal, just so that everyone's clear.
The, also looking, this is longer term, but I think we're looking at just what is the staffing structure of the head office, which right now is superintendent, assistant superintendent. And is significantly thinner than would be typical even for a district of our size. And I think, you know, especially when we think more about the HR and people and public facing side of the role, we've started to sketch out, is there essentially an additional position there that would be hugely valuable to the community and to our staff and therefore ultimately to the students as well. Nothing immediate on that, but I think we will in particular sort of be benchmarking against other similar districts and get a sense of how others have approached it. And would eventually bring something back to the committee in terms of potentially creating a new position. But if we would do that, that one is a much bigger budget commitment, obviously. And so we'll have to figure out what the timing for that would be as well. That is something that we're looking at. Two other smaller things. One is we will be beginning collective bargaining unit C, which is up for renewal this year. And also, you know, I think Mark has spoken a lot about the need to make sure we establish good standard operating procedures for all sorts of things in the district. One that has popped up a lot recently is hiring procedures, and whether you're talking about any staff level up through principal, what is the actual process and who's involved in what way in making the decision. So obviously those procedures all exist out there in the world. These things happen, but I think having them actually written down and standardized will be useful. So that's something we'll be working on. And I think last thing, just to touch on probably just where we are in the sort of substitute versus interim versus full-time principal process. I don't know if you want to touch on it.
Yeah, and I actually went over to Eleanor just we had that staffing phase. I talked to folks up there a little bit about it, but initially we had talked about maybe moving forward with a substitute principal so that there was no loss in leadership of the building. And so we're lucky enough that Lee was available to do that. And then initially the idea was to then move into an interim who would then take over after Tim's substitute period is over, carry us to the rest of the year while we do a search for a principal who conceivably start July 1st. That's typically when principals begin. So that's still a viable option. The other concept that we've been thinking around is maybe starting the search for the permanent principal earlier, so that we're at the right part of the year in terms of when principal searches happen, which is typically January through March or so. And so, and that if we are to put together a committee with multiple rounds and doing a similar process that like we did with our last hire, you know, if we put that committee together relatively soon, we're looking at being ready to conduct a search right in that a normal kind of search time of year. And so that's something that I think would be wise to consider moving forward with the search. What it does is it creates a potential issue on the backside in terms of, you know, once Tim can no longer offer his services to the district, what do we need to do? So we still might have to hire another interim for the second half of the school year. But then, we also could be lucky enough that, the right candidate could say that, oh, I'm able to separate earlier than I thought, or I have 60 days that, that once that's done, I'm ready. Or they might say, hey, I can't wait to start, but it has to be July 1st, but we want to make sure that we have an interim. So I'll do another search for an interim to take the reins probably after the holidays. But in the meantime, we want to start that search for the permanent principal and give that enough time to do it well. Have stakeholders that have a voice in that process, and making sure that we're catching, as many folks who are interested in this in our initial pools. And I think right now we have reason to be pretty optimistic because we do have interest from principals around the region who have reached out and said, oh, I've always wanted to work at Lenox, to see that this might be a great opportunity. I know that you guys did a search last year, but I couldn't do it last year because, we were too close to COVID and I didn't want to leave my community in the lurch, but now I'm interested in learn a little bit more. And so we've had a number of folks reach out to ask some of these questions off the record. So that's exciting to see that that are already garnering interest before you even posted the position. So I feel cautiously optimistic that we'll get a nice pool of candidates that we'll have a chance to look at over the winter into the spring to take that out next year.
So I think just to clarify, we are likely to need an interim during the second half of the school year. And so is that search going to happen sort of at the top of a shorter search kind of process, but what's the time frame for making sure we know who we would have to the extent we need somebody?
Yeah, so I think we want to start that process as soon as possible. I just need to sit down with Tim Lee and just find out his final date. And really start that search. Will it happen at the same time or maybe it happen earlier? But we need to make sure we start getting some folks lined up for that. Now there are a few, again, retired folks in the area who have reached out and expressed interest the first time around when we had an interim position and said, again, this is really exciting to me, professionally, but I can't do it right at this moment. If it was in the spring, maybe I could. So there's also potential that some of those folks are still out there and, a spring opportunity might just line up perfectly with their other obligations, professionally and personally.
And so to summarize, kind of roughly speaking, timeline over the next month is sort of the window to make sure we know what we have for an interim for the period we need them for. And get set up full search committee, which would then run sort of November into candidates in January, February, and then interim for as much as needed, full principal starting as soon as possible, July 1st at the latest.
Right. And we already do have a active search or an active posting, anyway, not a search or posting for interim principals. So we do have some candidates already in that pool. I'll just go back online and then we'll check our dates. I don't know if we may just have to clean up the dates and then repost it, but we do have some folks there. And again, if we were to refresh that posting, typically that puts it back up to the top of the page. And so sometimes it, generates new interest as well.
Sorry, and you said that's a much more streamlined process.
Yeah, because, with the interim's not going to be with us, for the long term, like, we don't have to have, I think, such a large, stakeholder group and go through all these rounds and do, that type of thing. So, I think that process moves ahead a little, more quickly. I think it would be important, particularly for the interim, certainly for both, definitely for the interim to, really allow teachers to have significant voice in that part of the process, because they will be working with this person pretty closely for the short period of time. So they have to be a good fit, because the time to kind of grow together is very short. So, I want to make sure that we get someone that is aligned with what they need and the support they need. And our teachers are, rightfully so, a little bit, nervous about, who's going to fill that role. The great Timmy's done a great job, but, unfortunately for us, there's other obligations and we can't make this a whole year commitment.
And
That's it.
teaching and learning,
We meet tomorrow. We have our agenda set, it's posted. I think obviously with, things that come from the, strategic plan and also the investigative report relative to bullying, we'll be talking about that on our agenda. As well as some other conversations about culture building and I don't remember everything that's on the agenda because we meet tomorrow, but, I think we are definitely going to be, digging in a lot to ways that we can support the community forums, ways that we can talk about programs to help us, because we've talked about this, that the need for robust investigation and tracking processes is obviously extremely important. What also is helpful is to have a culture in which we really are able to communicate inclusiveness and welcome, and that we don't treat each other that way, and so and there's always work to be done for that in any community. As kids come through, we've seen a lot of really great things coming from the Morris program, Second Step. I'm impressed with the 5th grade students who presented last year, I think, about what they learned through that. So I think that will be also under our conversations. We meet tomorrow. We're trying to meet the second Wednesday of each month. It doesn't stay hard and fast if we have conflicts, but we're trying to keep that consistent.
and do we have any update on the student rep to the school committee?
We don't. I mean, I think that's one of the things that got lost in the shuffle with a lot of this.
And I'll write it
I
down.
sent something, I did in fairness, because Tim was just getting up to speed. About 2 weeks ago, I did reach out to him and then he needed some direction as to what I was talking about. So that would be for me to connect back up with he and David about how that's going. I know the students did do an election in the spring and that was their traditional student government election. And then this is a separate, either a subgroup of that or a separate group that will be acting as a student advisory committee. So still hopeful that we're still going to focus on getting that done. I just also want to give a little bit of grace when we have Mr. Lee's jumping in the way he is, and that he's doing a lot of work in the buildings that I want to give him some grace to do that, but we'll be in touch.
Okay, and then school building is the final subcommittee report. And I don't know if we've actually mentioned this here, but September 20th, MSBA actually sent a team of 6 people out to meet with us. Some from the Boston office and some of their consultants from New York who fly in and actually look at buildings, and they had done an extensive read of our 50-60 page document, whatever it turned out to be, very lengthy. And they had many specific questions. They wanted to tour the building. But what we found out was there's no promises. It's not like, okay, we're going to have you on the list, in December and we're good to go. But they had 120 some odd requests or statements of interest. 70 of those were for their accelerated program of roofs and boilers and things like that. So we're not in that category. We were in the core category, and they had, I believe it was 54, maybe in the core category, of which they're visiting 21. We were one of the 21 that were visiting. Now, judging from other schools' experience, maybe some of those 30 that they aren't visiting will visit in other years. I don't know that, but they were visiting 21, which seemed, promising to us. They asked many good questions, but they said, sometime in November, we would find out if they're not going forward with us. And in December, and maybe we find out also, they have a board meeting, I believe, December 21st or something, in which case they would actually vote which schools they're gonna go forward with this year. So we're fortunate that we got our foot in the door. At least they're paying attention to us, and that's really all that they promised was that they would come out and talk to us. It's nothing more than that, but some schools didn't get that. So,
And what is a yes? Let's say yes, both at that we are seeking is then we are in for funding as soon as we're ready to build something, or what is
Well-
actually approved at that point?
What happens is, and I may not have it exactly right, but they commit to working with us and having somebody be, work with us pretty extensively. At some point, based on when we have town meetings and whatever, we have a 270-day window in which we need to try to garner the approvals of the town to do a feasibility study. And I think that's kind of the next step is the feasibility study. And they begin to start paying a share of it. And it depends on characteristics that change. But what we were told was that on the current listing, we would have been eligible for 44%. I think it was 44% was in some. Now that can change depending what you might be asking for, but that 44% would cover feasibility study too. As soon as we're in their system, it starts to get paid
Yep.
for by them.
It's a reimbursement process.
The reimbursement process.
And so I guess I'm just wondering, do we risk almost getting, well, it's not necessarily a risk, if there is a yes, is there then some clock of, okay, well, then you actually have to start building within 3 years or something?
I mean, ultimately, yes, but like the first thing is we would have to have an architect, draw up the
Yep.
plans, right? And then they look at the feasibility study pieces, and then they would also come back to you and say, hey, here's another option. We have these kind of off the shelf kind of plans of districts that are kind of your size and your size. If you use this ready to go plan, then you don't have to work with your architect. You can kind of say thank you, but no, thank you. And then from that point forward, then you do have to start with the process of committing funds and committing to a timeline and hiring a construction manager who would oversee that. But yeah, it's not like an IOU to be used at some other date in cash in, a decade from now. They want to see that you're serious, which is why, again, it requires so many upfront votes, because they want to make sure that towns are serious, not just kicking the tires, once you get through the initial round.
But they said they would work with us to figure out when to start that 270-day thing. Like, it wouldn't start on December 21st, all of them, by whatever, August 21st, we've got to be done. They would figure out what good timing for us would be.
And in terms of, and the feasibility study would include sort of different options for how best to meet our needs. It's not definitely build something totally new or definitely do just some renovations.
Right. I think that in recent years, when this MSBA was authorized in 2005, I think, somewhere along that. I think they were really interested in looking at existing buildings and if you could work within the existing building. Now, we know we have issues with asbestos and, or vermiculite in the wall, so we don't know about that. I mean, that would all be part of a broader study, but, and that was not covered. Interesting enough, the vermiculite and asbestos stuff was not covered by the work we had done last spring when we had the consultants come and look at the building and talk to us. It was not covered. That was beyond the scope of what it'd be very hard for them to estimate. Yeah, if you do this, then you gotta knock the whole thing down and get rid of the asbestos, we didn't get any of that kind of information. So.
Can you remind me who is on the different subcommittees? Is this committee also includes people beyond the school committee, correct?
Yes, Bob and I are the representatives from the school committee. It includes the town manager, the high school principal, another person at the high school who's familiar with the academic program. That was Karen Village. It included, ultimately, once we get approval, it has to include a finance committee member. The work we did last year didn't have to include all this. I thought it did.
Yeah,
You need to have somebody familiar with the building trades. That was Neil Maximilian, who also played the role of the selectman. Trying to get, I'm sorry,
Good carpenter.
Dave Carpenter was the
Yeah.
finance committee rep. He moved out of town, so we get a different person. He's moved to Great Barrington. So it's, at some point, there are very, very specific spots you have to have filled. We tried to do that last year. We had all the spots filled, but it was premature. So,
but the point being
But
is
in
the
precedent.
conversation is coming collaboratively with other
Yes.
entities within the town, because we're dealing with buildings, and we also have an ongoing list of capital improvements, so there's the idea of like what goes into capital improvements, and the ideas of, like has been happening in the last year or two, is taking care of buildings and working collaboratively with the select board about what has to be placed, improved, whatever, and so that conversation's happening. This conversation is also happening, and it's including the other groups and
Right.
stakeholders, which I think is good.
yeah, and we also had the lead custodian from the high school involved. So, yeah, so it was fairly extensive. I mean, not a large group, but we're looking to add Ed Lane to the committee, because he also has some background in building.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just as good a news as I can give you at this point on the school building process. It might turn to be nothing. It might turn out to be like, we're going to wait 15 years and do this in a year, 15 years. Could be that with us too, but we hope not, but it could.
I think it was also encouraging, I think, just to hear that, if we were to, put through this round, that, we'd be responsible for right now, unless anything changes, 56 cents on the dollar, which is a lot better than we thought.
Right, right. And I think as Melissa pointed out, depending on what you're asking for, MSBA won't pay for certain things. So that percent could go down. If we're saying we actually have to have this, but it's not something they'll cover, then the percent goes down a little bit. But right at the moment, to know that we're in the 44% range was big, because I thought it could have been 20%.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah,
I was surprised to hear 44. It can also go up if you add, if you're the leads designation, so that your house is, your school is, it's always, you're looking for net zero.
Yeah,
Which is very difficult to get and almost impossible, but you can do certain things to add percentage points. The electric car, spots, for charging, so things like that, and it'll add some points to that percentage rate. So you might be able to keep it somewhere around 44, if you want a bigger auditorium than what they're willing to reimburse for. You could keep it around 44 by adding this other. So you have to look at weighing the options.
okay. Any other questions? Okay. Guess we're ready. Us to adjourn. Somebody wants to make that motion.
move to adjourn.
Well, second,
Okay, it's a call for roll call vote.
David Regular, aye.
Right, that deny.
Bob Vaughn, aye.
Tomorrow,
Aye.
Or cast aye.
Megan Kirby. Oh, she's an aye also. We are adjourned. Thank you.